So thank you all for being here. It's really nice to see everyone in the yurt again to start the year. I just wanted to piggyback off of Seisen's last talk. Seisen is our abbot, head teacher, and founder. She says hello. And she gave a talk during session. Was anyone here for that? Yes, a few people were here. Nice. She gave a talk on a piece of paper that was given to her by her teacher, Maizumi Roshi. Just kind of a random written down pen and paper kind of a thing that he gave her that was called the Three Principles of Buddhism. Very simple. At the end of her practice, 20 years living and working and practicing at the monastery, her teacher decides to give her a piece of paper that says the Three Principles of Buddhism, which is kind of ridiculous because, infinite principles of awakening, obviously. But we do what we can to try to express it. And so, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit off of what she was talking about. And I've talked to her about the talk personally. And so I wanted to share some of the things that came up. Hopefully they're helpful for some of us in some kind of way. So the first principle was what he called Mahaprajna Paramita, which translates to the great perfection of wisdom. And Seisen talked about that as really realizing the oneness and the emptiness of the universe. So that's principle one, is really seeing this oneness. Principle three was the Bodhisattva vows and practicing the Bodhisattva vows, which we will chant at the end of this talk, so you'll get to see those for those who aren't familiar. And then the second one is the one I really wanted to look at, which was, he says, the key to attaining the Buddha way is the three studies of the precepts, samadhi, and wisdom. So that kind of stood out to me, primarily because of this word study. That was the thing that really poked out to me. Because when I think of Zen, and I think of all the koans and all the writings and all the one-on-one interviews I've had and all the Dharma talks where all the teachers and ancestors and Buddhas say, let go of your intellectual mind. This isn't about study. Burn your books. Throw away the sutras. Let go of your intellectual mind. Let go of all your concepts. I'm always struck when I see the word study. One of the most famous, Soto Zen lines from Dogen Zenji is to study the Buddha way, is to study the Buddha, is to study the self. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. And so here's Maizumi Roshi, the guy who brought our lineage of Zen from Japan to America, writing on this little personal note that one of the basic, most important precepts of Buddhism is to study the precepts, samadhi, and wisdom. And so I asked Seisen about that. And I'm always looking at, all these words and how we express things and how we communicate about things. And so, I think the major important point to me that I was able to get to with Seisen and looking at it for myself is that when we see this word study in Buddhism, it might be a little bit different from how we usually use it, right? At least for me, when I see the word study, I think of learn, acquire knowledge, memorize, hammer in some kind of concept or idea or model or example or something like that. to know it, right? If I'm going to study something, then by the end of my studying, I'm going to know that thing, right? And it's in word form, and it's like structures, and it's maps, and all these very concrete kind of a thing. But when we say study in our practice, I guess just the best thing to use is synonyms. That was the most helpful thing for me. It's more like investigation. It's more like curiosity. And a great word that Seisan used was immersion. So to study the self, as Dogen said, is, I think in psychology and some branches of therapy, we study the self in a very concrete way. This happens to you here, and therefore you get this, and this trauma happens, and therefore, and we can come up with these models, and we can follow pathways, and we can use evidence to kind of like show that this leads to that, and this is a product of that. So that's kind of like psychology studying the self. But if we take this kind of immersion study of the self, then that means to study the self is a constant, ceaseless, unending curiosity of what am I? What is this? How am I changing? Where are my triggers? In conjunction with therapy, psychology, these two different kinds of study can be very powerful. And so I just really appreciate that. And, because particularly we talk about the precepts and we talk about samadhi, and I'll talk about samadhi in a second, but these are not things to know. These are not things to read in a book and then like keep, in your pouch to like hold for later. These are visceral experiences that are constantly changing. And so I really appreciate this study as like endless immersion. It's almost the opposite of knowing, right? When we study for the test, we know it. We get it in our heads and we know it. But this kind of study, Dogen studying the self, Maizumi Roshi's study samadhi, it's the opposite. It's letting go of what we think we know and immersing ourselves totally in every moment, open to change, to everything. So that's kind of the heart of the talk. We can talk briefly about what these three things are: the precepts, samadhi, wisdom. So the precepts, I'm just going to list them really quickly for those of us who are new and don't know what the precepts are, and even for those of us who are very familiar with them. Just kind of let it soak in however it may. But the precepts that we study in Zen Buddhism are not doing harm, doing good for others, taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma or the teachings, taking refuge in Sangha or community, non-killing, non-stealing, chaste conduct, non-lying, not being deluded, not talking about others' errors and faults, not lifting ourselves up and blaming others, not being stingy, not being angry, and not thinking ill of the three treasures, or not thinking ill of our life and our practice. So it's a really quick rundown. Maybe it gives you a kind of broad view of these precepts. And we've been talking about the precepts recently as kind of guideposts. That's the word, guideposts. Kyoshin gave a little talk. Oh, I lost my internet. Oh well. It's a great
page. We can hear you, but you're frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay, good. So yeah, Kyoshin talked recently when she got her preceptor ship. She gave a talk about maps and how these precepts are kind of like a map to help guide us in our practice in being Buddha, being a bodhisattva. And I hope they continue to play an important part in our practice, particularly because it looks like this year we are going to have a few people who are going to take Jukai. Jukai is the ceremony where you officially become a Buddhist. You have found a temple or a teacher that you really like working with. You sew this thing, which is called a rakusu. You'll see a number of people around the room wearing rakusus. And you take some classes in the precepts, 8 classes to be exact. So it's a long process. It's like a 4, 5, 6-month process of back online. Really studying these 16 precepts, really making them, and when I say study, it really is both, right? We have a workbook that we work from, so we learn, we know the precepts, we can memorize them if we want, but hopefully it becomes a practice of immersion, really making the precepts our life, each one, not talking about others' errors and faults. Sure, we can study that and know it and regurgitate it, but can we live that every single day? Lying. Can we live with lying every single day, constantly bringing that awareness, immersing ourselves in this practice? So then we have the study of samadhi. And samadhi refers to, it's like the scariest word to define, because the minute you say samadhi is, you kind of already have it wrong, I'm afraid. But, just for communication purposes, samadhi refers to, the experience of really dropping off into this moment, right? So most often we talk about it in terms of meditation, right? So really deep meditation, when we truly can let go and drop off all of our thoughts and concepts, and we're really just being this moment. I don't want to say anything else because every word I say transgresses samadhi, because even to say, I just had, already it's gone. Already it's gone. If you have any awareness of samadhi, any idea of having it or not, it's not it. Total absence of any concept of have or have not. And I believe that all of us have had that experience. I've said that many times before. Aitken Roshi says in his commentary on The Gateless Gate, which is a collection of koans, he tells a story of when his dad heard a car crash outside, and he ran outside, and without even thinking, he was able to help lift the car off of the couple that it rolled over on. And he talks about that experience of just no thought, just pure reaction. You hear something awful and you run to it and you're just completely in the moment. That is samadhi, which is a visceral, personal, physical, momentary experience. How can you study that? Well, we take this new version of study, curiosity, investigation. I know I'm probably frozen, y'all. I'm sorry about that. But you can still hear me? Yeah, okay, thank you. Just think of it as a podcast. um, so, yeah, to study samadhi, I love that. That's what we're doing in Zazen. That's what we do when we come here and we sit down. We're not going to be in perfect focus, dropping off every moment. In fact, we'll probably spend 99.8% of our time in here not doing that. But that's the study, the curiosity. What is this samadhi? How do I cultivate it? What does it mean to have it when there's nothing to have? And so every time we come in here, we're doing that study. And it has nothing to do with knowing and everything to do with opening to it constantly. Does samadhi have a feeling? Does samadhi happen somewhere in the body? Do I have a body in samadhi? Sounds like a nursery rhyme now. So that's the study of samadhi. And then the study of wisdom, right? He said the three studies of precepts, samadhi, and wisdom. And when we talk about wisdom, we're talking about navigating our lives, right? So in this samadhi state, we drop off all ideas and concepts and really experience that oneness of all things. We also like to say the emptiness of all things. And for those of you who were here for my Santa Claus talk, I talked about it in terms of Santa Claus. At first, we think it's real. We think our life and all of our worries and all of our desires and our conditions and everything, we think they're real. And then we have this experience of like, oh, actually, there is no Santa Claus. There is no self. There is no world. All these concepts and separations that I make for myself. Totally just delusion. And yet we wake up. I know my name is Bobby or Chowa. I know there's a yurt in the backyard. I know that there's people hungry. I know that there's oppression and inequity in the world. And so just like Santa Claus, we acknowledge Santa Claus. We acknowledge the reality of this separation. Both are true. Right? Is that crazy? Can we all acknowledge that there is no Santa Claus and that there is absolutely a Santa Claus? And we all know who he is and we can all talk about him? I don't know. I hate sticking to analogies and metaphors, but it kind of holds up. So that's the wisdom. The wisdom is, how do I deal with Santa Claus? How do I deal with conflict? Even though I know this conflict is empty, it's also very much affecting people in the world. So yeah, wisdom is, like the famous koan, once you get to the top of 100-foot pole, how do you step off? One way to see that is wisdom. How do we cultivate wisdom? And how can you study wisdom? Right? We think that you get wisdom from studying, right? That's usually how we think about it. You study something, you know it, and therefore you are wise. But studying wisdom, to me, sounds like the three tenets: not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action, right? So if I am going into a new community, if I'm volunteering to help the unsheltered, if I'm going to advocate for anti-racism, if I am going to help out a family member, can I go into it totally open with this samadhi study, let's say, of totally letting go of all my preconceived notions, and then just bear witness to what needs to be done? How can I serve? What do I need to learn? What are my blind spots? And bearing witness to that. Letting go of, I always think here in terms of social action, anti-war, environmental activism, anti-racism. Can I come into each rally, to each piece of legislation, to each protest, totally open and study the wisdom that I can gain? Where do I get wisdom? Can even like the dumbest, most ignorant person I know give me wisdom? How does wisdom happen? Where does it come from? What does it feel like? That is studying wisdom. And in my experience, that study really does allow me to find wisdom almost everywhere. It's really amazing. Especially, even Dharma talks. I've been coming to Dharma talks, a lot of us have, for decades. And every single one of these Dharma talks, we're saying the same thing. But if we can come with this mind of studying wisdom, just open, then it's amazing how you hear new things every time. Even when the same sentence is said, you can hear new things. Or when some broy guy who seems to only care about beer and porn, I don't know, and then you just listen and you just show up ready to study what wisdom is. And now all of a sudden, this broy porn guy is like changing my life with this amazing wisdom. And so, these days at least, I'm way less interested in being wise than I am like seeing the wisdom from everything and everyone. It makes my life a lot better. It makes me way more able to connect with people too. Anyway, so that's just a quick little look at these 3 studies that Maizumi Roshi say are super important for our practice. And what's our practice? That's important too. He starts it by saying the key to attaining the Buddha way. I don't even know what to say about that other than I hope everyone in here and on here asks themselves that question. Do you care about attaining the Buddha way? Because maybe you don't. And like, fuck it. Like, don't. Um, it's my bodhisattva vow to try to elucidate that Buddha way for all beings. Because that Buddha way, I think, in my opinion, is liberation. And it really is, the quote unquote end to suffering for myself and others. Um, but who knows? Who knows? I'm not advocating for or slanging the Buddha way. I'm studying it. I'm open. I'm curious. So yeah, kill the Buddha way, attaining the Buddha way. What does that really mean to you? I mean, for me, I can definitely share that I had to go through a lot of fuck the Buddha way before I really found my path on it. So yeah, bring that same study, that same curiosity and investigation to like, what am I doing here? Why do I come here on Sundays? Why do I put this bib on? Why do I live here? I think that's a worthy a worthy relationship to study. Thank you all.